Three, two, one. Hello everybody and welcome to something a little bit different. I'm doing a Undead build order video. I'm going to cover 3 of the most popular build orders used in 1v1. And for anyone who's hoping to learn about the Undead race, I hope this video helps. More than likely I'll be doing the same for the other 3 races in the future with Orc, Human, and Night Elf, of course. So right now you're looking at my screen, and the first build we're going to be talking about in this video is the Fein Build, or the early hero build as some like to call it nowadays. So, common heroes that is used with this build, of course, for first heroes, more than likely it's going to be the Death Knight, although in some cases an Undead mirror you could start off with a Lich. Now, second common heroes in this build are usually the Lich or the Panda. Panda more used versus Human. So we have those, and then third heroes, now this isn't what you have to stick with, but I'm saying what's mostly used by like high level players and most ladder players is, for third heroes we also have Dark Ranger as an option, Panda, Tinker, and a Pit Lord. Now Pit Lord's more for Orc, Tinker's more for Night Elf, I guess they could be used for Human too, and the Panda's definitely for Night Elf, Human, if they do go for gyro play. So common matchups that you can use this build order in are Undead Mirror, Undead versus Human, and Undead versus Orc. You don't really use this build versus Night Elf, as Fein builds are pretty weak versus Night Elf. Strategies that you can go into with using this build to open your game: you can do a tier 3 destroyer push. You get about 2 or 3 destroyers out by the time you do that, and it can be pretty powerful if hit at the right timing. Like for Orc, you can kill a lot of burrows. For Human, if they don't have that many towers in their expansion, you could definitely break that easy. Versus Human, you can also do a tier 2 wagon all in. That's when you get tier 2, you get your slaughterhouse out, and instead of taking to tier 3, you start building meat wagons and put a lot of aggression onto their expansion. And of course you have Banshee play, when you can add temples later on for, of course, curses and stuff. More commonly this is used versus Orc. So there are some pros and cons to this build. The pros are you get a much quicker tech out compared to usual for the Undead race. You can get good scouting info as you are able to build that extra ACO, and when you send out your first hero to be aggressive, you can scout around with him. This is why this build's pretty common versus Human, as you are able to be out on the map at all times to help scout for their expansion. And it allows the Undead to be aggressive. Like I said, you can have your Death Knight out. You can try to steal some creeps with the coil. It gives you good scouting information if you're there while the Human is trying to take their expansion. You do have an opportunity to kill a lot of militia. So now that we gave a brief overview of this build, let me show you the build itself. I don't need this. Wait, wrong one. Yeah, this one. There we go. Alright, so I did do this. I was playing versus a computer, just something really quick to show you this build. So right now the game has just started. You queue up one acolyte, and then you start your altar, and then right after the altar you start your zig. So at the start you get one acolyte going to the gold mine, you hit your altar and your zig, and then you immediately start your second acolyte right after that. And of course send your ghoul out to chop wood, of course. So you got 4 acolytes out. Now when the 5th acolyte comes out, that's the one you're going to use to build your crypt with. Placements can be pretty bad. I know myself, I'm not the best at building placements. Like on maps with Goblin Zeppelin, it's really not that wise to block off your gold mine, because your opponent can't do a Zeppelin drop, and if you have it walled off, you could do a lot of damage. But I'm not going to go too big into that. So you got 5 acolytes, so your mine is fully mining. You got your crypt on the way, so you might be thinking, what's the sixth acolyte for? He's going to be the scout, and he's also, depending on some situations, you can use him to build your shop right away. Me personally, I like to send him straight out to scouting, and then, you know, build the shop. So he's going to be your scout. Now, keep in mind, I'm versus a computer, so I don't really know what the computer strategies are, but I know if I scout, he'll just pull a bunch of militia. But keep in mind, I pretend this is supposed to be used on a real person, so it could be nice to scout his base. Or what some undeads will do is they'll just stick them around the expansion, because most of the time humans are going to open up AM footmen. Not really something you should scout into, but you know, on ladder it might be safer to expand, as players are definitely a little bit more unorthodox on ladder. So yeah, you send out your 6th acolyte, you build your shop about the time he comes out, and of course when your altar finishes up, start your death knight. Now the next thing you're going to build at 215 gold, I'm a little slow at it, but you're going to start your graveyard. So of course you can build your fiends once your tech gets out. And then the next thing you're going to be doing is, once the crypt finishes, you're going to build 2 ghouls. That way you can have that standard 3 ghoul count on the lumber. Yeah, 3 ghouls. And then when your Death Knight comes out, he's going to immediately pick up a rod and he goes out. Now there's 2 things you can do with your Death Knight. You can go out and try to be aggressive, you know, try to creep jack some of your opponent's creeps with Death Coil, but that's not the only option you can do. You can also do some skeleton creepings. I recommend watching replays of 120, as he does some pretty interesting things with 4 skeletons. For Last Refuge, I know there should be there's a pig right here and a pig right here. You kill those 2 pigs, you can get 4 skeletons, and you can use that to creep out this, or I do believe you can snipe the Ogre Magi with 4 skeletons. Me personally, I always go out and harass. I'm old-fashioned like that, but that seems to be the new trend with Undead, is to just creep with the skeletons and still get that much quicker tech out. So DK's out, he picks up his rod, and then once you have enough resources, also start a 2nd zig. You can do a 1 zig tech, that's considered super greedy. I do the 2 zig tech. To me it just feels much more safe, and it allows me to build more fiends once my tier 2 does start. No, the only downside is you delay your tier 2 by a little bit, so I'm going to fast forward. And actually that's really about all to this build. Of course, later on, when you hit tier 2, you start your slaughterhouse, your lich, and then start your tier 3, and you know, stuff like that. But this early game is pretty much the gist of it. Just to review again, you start up an acolyte, you get your altar, your zig, your 2nd acolyte. 2nd acolyte's gonna build the crypt, and then you send him back to gold, and then you build another acolyte. This will be acolyte number 6, and you build the shop by the time he comes out and goes out and scout. And then of course when the altar finishes, start your Death Knight, and then when the graveyard is up, when you have 215 gold, you start your graveyard, and that's pretty much the Fein build. It's a very good build. I use it a lot. So that's one Undead build out the way. Let's talk about another one. This build I like to call the Pili Fein build. It's the name of Pilibot, this old school Undead who really revolutionized this build. I believe nowadays people just call it the delayed hero Fein build, which is kind of lazy. Okay, so just like with the Fiends, you got some heroes that you tend to see with this build order. You tend to see DKs first with this build like usual, although in the case of like Undead Mirror, you can open up with a Lich first, or with a tier 2 Lich Tower Rush, but I'm going to explain that a little later. So yeah, Lich can also be pretty much the common 2nd hero to go with this build. 3rd heroes include Dark Rangers, Pit Lords, and the Dread Lord, possibly in some situations, but you really don't see him anymore. The common matches to use this build, Undead versus Orc and Undead versus Undead are the two most common matchups. You don't really want to use it versus Human, as you just need to get that quicker tech out so you can hit with the destroyers as early as possible, and you also need the good scouting information. So this build really isn't used versus Human, and once again, you don't really want to use this versus Night Elf, as Fein builds are pretty weak versus Night Elves most of the time. There are situations where it can be good, but most of the time it's just not used versus Night Elf. Anyways, strategies that you can roll into by using this build. You can do a Lich Tower Rush. Now, a Lich Tower Rush is a very, very cheesy thing to do, but a lot of undeads used to do it quite often versus Orc. So you just build it off the same. I'll show you, of course, in the replay how this build goes. And instead of building a Death Knight first, you build a Lich, and you build a 6 Acolyte, and you'll still have your 2 Fiends, and then you pull your ghouls with your Lich, Frost Shield first, and then you'll Frost Shield your Acolyte, and then you'll head over to the Orc base with rods and a Sacrificial Skull, and you pretty much just do a tower push on them. It's really map dependent. It's kind of fallen out of the meta. You don't really see it used anymore. And other things you can do with this build order, you can do a tier 2 wagon all in. I believe that's Miss Cleric. Well, yeah, I guess versus Undead if you want to be aggressive, but I don't know why I put that in there. Don't do a tier 2 wagon all in off this build. And of course, another thing you can do, especially versus Orc, this is definitely coming back into the meta, is Banshee play at tier 3. You throw down your temple and get Banshees for their curses, of course. It's very strong versus Orc. And yeah, that's pretty much the strategies you can roll off into this build. Another thing I didn't put is you could just play standard Fiend Destroyer, you know, but those are the common things. So there are some pros and cons to this build. So the pros are you can power level your hero, you know, most of the time is the Death Knight. And so with the early Fiends out, it's definitely pretty easy for him to creep, especially with skeletons, and you're definitely able to get a level 3 depending how much your opponent wants to harass you. So very easy to get level 3 on your Death Knight. It's a safe build versus early aggression. Yes, it's a very safe build. You get plenty of Fiends out for the early defense, and you delay your tech a little, so if your Acolytes are harassed, you won't lose any Acolytes while teching, hopefully, is the thought process behind why I typed that there. There are some cons though. The cons is your tech gets delayed a lot. Now, Undeads have been trying to mix it up, trying to tech as quick as possible. Some will just do a 1 Fiend tech or 2 Fiend tech, but me personally, I do a 3 Fiend tech. It's very safe, and the only con is it does delay the tech. Lack of scouting. Now, this build's a cookie cutter build, means you have to do everything exactly the way it needs to be. So you're going to be supply capped at some points of this build. So you're not able to build that extra Acolyte to go out and scout, which could be a downfall if an Orc wants to do like a no racks, fast tech kind of thing, or if the Undead is doing an early expansion. But you can use your skeletal minions to scout. You just won't get the scouting information as quick. And you have to play defensive at the start. You can't, unless you're doing a Lich Tower Rush, you can't really be that aggressive with this build. I mean, there are timings you can do with this build, most of them versus Orc, but really you have to play defensive. With this build, you just creep. And yeah, you just creep with your DK, try to get him level 3, but the early game, you're definitely playing defensive. So I'm going to hop into a replay of this build, and I will show you how it is done. Okay, I don't know why my Control S isn't working. Okay, so the game has started. Once again, I'm versus a computer. All these builds are going to be versus computers, just so I can get the quick things going. So I immediately start one Acolyte and rally it to the gold mine, and then you take another Acolyte and you're going to build a crypt first. And after you build that crypt, the next thing's going to be a graveyard. So you do delay the altar. That's why it's known as the delayed hero build. So, you know, crypt, altar, gold allows you build your second Acolyte, so that'll bring you up to 5. Now, for this build, you It might be a little boring at the start because you just, with delaying everything, you really just stare at your pace for a while. So you got 5 acolytes. Now once resources allow 185 gold, you're going to start your altar. Boom. Like I said, this cookie cutter build. So at 155 gold, you're going to be starting your ziggurat. So you can of course build your hero. I think I put mine right around here. Yeah. So there. Boom. Ziggurat altar. Now versus Orc, you definitely want to wall off your gold mine, otherwise that Blade Master is going to get a lot of juicy kills. Maybe later on I can show like building placements to block off gold mines on each map. That might be another project for the future. Anyways, once the crypt finishes, you're going to start a second ghoul. Don't start the third ghoul yet. 135 gold. The next thing's going to go down is your shop. For this build, you're going to delay your third ghoul by quite a bit, actually, because you just won't have the supply to do it. So you're going to be running off with 2 ghouls for just a little bit. Now, once your altar finishes, you won't be able to start your Death Knight right away. You're going to have to wait for that Zig to finish, and depending how quick you are putting that Ziggurat down will decide how delayed that DK is going to be. So once the Ziggurat finishes, you immediately start up a Death Knight, and you immediately start up a Fiend at the same time. And it's going to bring you up to 17 supply. And then at 150 gold, you're going to start your second Zig, and hopefully this Zig will finish off your wall. Boom. So I'm pretty sure mine's walled off. Alright. And then at 225 gold, or excuse me, 215 gold, you're going to start your second Fiend. And if it times out well, the second Fiend will come out around the same time as your Death Knight. Boom. Now, depending on the map, TM isn't one of the maps you can do, but with this build, like I know on Amazonia, you can use your Fiend, your first Fiend, to come out and pull back like the Goblin Laboratory creeps on AZ, right? And you can just slowly pick away at them, just trying to. It'll give you something to do, and it'll weaken up the creeps for when your Death Knight comes out. That's always some things you can do, but in TM you can't really do that.